Hey everybody, welcome back to Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we are going to supercharge a Tadabase form component. So what we're doing today is we're actually going behind the scenes to an upcoming application that I'm building called the App Marketplace. And this is going to be available for Tadabase users to purchase and install community-made templates. Okay, so the community members and Tadabase users are going to have the ability to add or post a template of their own for resale. Now, the goal of what we're doing today is to take this form and turn it from this into this. Now, I've actually made a video on how I did this in the past. It was about using display rules and custom CSS classes. But when I made this finished product, I was so happy about it and so excited about it that I wanted to share it and make another video about it again. So although it looks like I just kind of removed everything from the form, what's really happening is that there's a lot of kind of dynamic hiding and showing based on pipe values and things like that. So I'm going to show you how it works right now. So we needed a way for somebody to search for one of their own applications and let us know whether or not that app was found in their Tadabase account or not. So you can see I'm searching against my own account right now. And if I search for the name of the app that I want, if we find the app, then we get this nice message. It shows us the app ID that we need in order to make this whole thing work. We also need the name of the template, and we can also then see the next steps. So part of this process is I didn't want people to continue on through the form unless they had app found. Okay, just to show you that one more time, if we don't find an app, then we can't go any further. And that's kind of that was a big goal of mine, and we were able to achieve that. So anyways, let's take a look at how we got from point A to point B in this supercharged Tadabase form. Okay, so the main components of what we're doing here is we're using the form component, we're using display rules, we're using CSS selectors, and we're also using CSS classes and custom CSS. And all of that is built in directly into the form component and the actual page itself. So we're going to be adding just 25 lines of custom CSS. It's really not much at all. And the rest of the kind of stuff that's happening is all happening directly inside the form itself. Okay, so the first thing I just want to show you is what this looks like when we are filling out the form in its beginning state. So there are no rules. There's nothing fancy happening yet. So what this looks like when we fill this out now is we're searching for an app name. Now what this part is here is actually triggering a pipe. So down here in buttons.in/HTML, there's an option for trigger pipe. Clicking this button is actually running a pipe. Using the Tadabase REST API, I am searching for an app that is built by a user by the app name. And then I'm returning 4 different things. Okay, the app ID, the app name, total number of items found, and the response status. So either success or false, I think it is, as the error. Okay, so what that looks like is when we search for a particular app name, here are the responses that we get. Okay, we get false, so it didn't find anything, didn't find anything. The actual pipe, it ran successfully, so it didn't fail. Okay, it ran successfully, it just didn't find anything. And the total items is 0. So what we're going to be focusing in on here is this value right here, total items 0, where the alternative is if I find an app by name successfully, this returns successfully, this returns successfully, and total items is 1. So we can use this value to do a whole bunch of different cool things. Basically, if it's a 0, then hide a bunch of stuff. If it's a 1, then show some stuff. Okay, so that's what it looks like by default. And these messages right here are simply just small snippets of HTML. So again, I went into buttons and HTML, and we've added these 2 lines of text. Now, what I did here is I gave them some CSS classes. And this is kind of the beginning stage of adding CSS classes within Tadabase. So really utilizing the flexibility of Tadabase to define custom CSS classes so that you can do extra cool things with them later. So the first thing I did is I made a div element, so just a container to hold this particular paragraph text, and I gave it a class called app failed. Okay, and the alert that I'm using is alert space alert slash or hyphen danger. Okay, so when total items is 0, so we don't find something, then we want to show this particular HTML field. Now, when total items is 1, we're going to show the other one. So this, as you can imagine, is kind of the opposite. It's the same structure, but I gave it a class of app success. And instead of alert, alert, danger, we're using alert, alert, success. Okay, so we have two different messages. One's going to be shown on total items equals 1. One is going to be shown on total items equals 0. So we're going to start with that when we start to build out our display rules. Okay, so the first display rule we're going to add, we're going to start with total items is higher than 0. So this is going to be our app found success. This is going to be the display rule that's going to handle everything for when the app is actually found. Okay, and let's start building this out and see what happens. So we're going to say when total items is higher than 0, we're going to show the CSS selector that we just talked about, which is app success. Otherwise, we're going to hide it. All right, this is the first thing that we're going to do. When this is 1, we are going to show this whole element right here, the green alert, the success alert for app found. That's the very first thing. So when we go back and we just start testing this piece by piece, we're going to see by default it's hidden. When I find something by name, it shows. Otherwise, it hides. Okay, that's step 1. Okay, now step 2 is we only want to show some of these fields when the app is found. We want to show the name of the app and the app ID to indicate that it was successful. So same methodology here, show, otherwise hide. We're going to do show template name, otherwise hide, and then we're going to do show app ID, otherwise hide. Okay, so again, I'm going to test this piece by piece as we go along so you can see the actual steps that we're taking in their direct results. So app, nothing. App marketplace, app found. And you can see that these two fields have just been shown. Now, there's a couple things I want to talk about with these two fields specifically because we're doing some again, more fancy stuff with these. Number 1, they are disabled, so they're read only. Now you have to remember that this is a form to add a new template. So by default, these are actual text inputs because they are fields coming from our actual data table. So these are actual fields for the record, and they are editable, but I don't want them to be. So I've done 2 things to these fields here, the app ID and the template name. Number 1, I've required them so that they have to be submitted so that nobody can just skip this part entirely, right? That's a big goal of this entire process is that you can't skip these required steps. And it's disabled read only. So once the pipe inside the form, that trigger pipe button, actually finds an app ID and an app name and fills in those values, they are disabled so that you can't actually modify them. So those are the 2 things that I've done for these fields. You can see it's repeated here on the template name field. The next thing we want to do is we want to make those same 2 fields. Sorry, we're still talking about those app ID and template name. We want to kind of make them more appealing, visually appealing. So we're going to add some extra input, some visual input to the user with a little checkbox. And to do that, we're going to utilize the add CSS class function within the display rules. So we're going to add a CSS class to template name, and we're going to add a CSS class to app ID. Now we're going to define our CSS class here, and then we're going to add the CSS to our page. Okay, and that looks like this. So those 2 things have CSS classes now. And what I want to do is actually take the CSS. Well, let's preview or check this page out one more time. Okay, so the fields are now being shown. We've already defined those rules. And if I take a look at these particular fields, here is our custom CSS class. You can see checkmark is right here. With that in mind, what we can do is we can then add some CSS to make this look way cooler. So the CSS is as follows. We are targeting the CSS class by actually targeting the selector. So we do dot and then the CSS class. And then what I've done here is called a pseudo class. So I'm not going to get into detail about pseudo classes right here and now, but basically we're inserting an icon, right? Because I can't edit the actual HTML of this, but I can insert an icon using this method through CSS. And I've defined that icon here in the content. So I've gotten the content code for this particular checkbox or checkmark, sorry. And now what this looks like is, let's find something again, app marketplace. We get this icon now. So just another method of making this look, again, more visually appealing and giving actual visual feedback or input back to the user to say like, yes, we found this and we're good to go. All right, now the next step is obviously we need to hide this, and we're going to have to hide these as well, because when something is successful, total items is 1 or higher than 0 rather, we only want to show 1, 2, 3 things on this page. So the next 2 things, actually we're going to come back to these items here. What I'm going to focus on now is the other steps in the multi-step form and the next button here, because if somebody searches for something and it doesn't return a result, they can still navigate to the next pages, and I don't want that. I want to just focus on this one particular aspect of the form, and I don't want anybody moving on from this until they have found the app successfully. So the next button will take them to the next page, or clicking on the actual step indicators will take them to the next page. So how are we going to do this? Well, it gets a little bit tricky, but again, once we kind of understand how the page is built and rendered, we can actually just, actually inspect it and find all the information that we need in order to make use of the Tadabase features. Again, showing CSS selectors, adding CSS selectors, and then the opposite, hiding and removing them. So if we look at these particular step indicators, we want to find these 3 and hide them. So in order to do that, here is the CSS that we need. Again, we're utilizing some pseudo classes here, but we're saying the form navigation page, which is this particular list item, but not the first of type. So it excludes the first one. And that's exactly what we want. We want to add essentially display none, so that those are hidden until total items equals 1. So we're going to copy this particular selector, and we're going to include this in our display rules, which when I figured out, oh my gosh, I can do this, I was, again, super pumped. I thought this was awesome. So we're going to do show CSS selector, and we're going to paste this whole thing in here. Okay, dot form navigation page, not first of type. Otherwise, we're going to hide it. So when I refresh this page, those 3 other steps are hidden by default. It's, that easy. But I guess we do need some understanding of CSS and how the page is actually rendered. Now, the next button is a different challenge to tackle. But again, Tadabase has so many options and so much flexibility that all we really needed to do here to make that work is disable the use of the default multi-step buttons. And what that allows us to do is add our own buttons. So I added my own next button through here, the button/HTML section. I dragged the next button right onto the form. And guess what? I gave it a custom CSS class. So I gave it a CSS class of next success. And then on each page, I added the previous and the next with no custom classes, previous and next with no custom classes, and previous and save, again, with no custom classes. The only one that we wanted to give a custom class to was the very first next button. And that then turns into another display rule where we're going to do the same thing. We're going to show the CSS class of next success. Otherwise, we're going to hide it. So that means by default, there are no multi-step page or step indicators to click on to move to the next page. And there's no next button to move to the next page unless total items is higher than 1. And that's what that looks like so far. Right now, that when we search for something successfully, those 4 items are then revealed to the user, and the user can proceed. Now we have to tackle the other side of the coin here, which is the failure. Okay, when an app is not found. So that's a little bit simpler. And then there's going to be one more display rule that we kind of have to come back to just to kind of tidy up some other stuff. But when you are building out something like this, you should follow the exact same steps that I'm doing. You're going to test each piece one at a time, right? Add a rule, test it. Add a rule, test it. Because we want to see how all of these things interact with each other. There's so much going on behind the scenes, all of these rules that are firing essentially together, that we need to make sure each one works before we move on to the next. So we're good here. We don't need anything else for this particular set of logic when total items is higher than 1, meaning an app was successfully found by name. Now, here's the next one we're going to do. Let's close that. App not found, failure. Okay. To begin, we're going to do when total items is lower than 1. Okay. That's our start. So our main condition is when it is less than 1. We are going to start to hide things, otherwise show them. And we're also going to do some hide, otherwise do nothing. So there's some instances where we want things to be hidden, but we don't want an else. We don't want an alternative. We just want it to, that's it. We just want it hidden. So the first thing we're going to do is show, just like the first one here, where we show the CSS selector of app success, we're going to show the CSS selector of app failed. I think that's what this was called. App failed. Yes. Show CSS selector of dot app failed, and that's going to be otherwise hidden. So again, by default, both of those custom little HTML messages are hidden. If total items is greater than 0, show the success one. If it's lower than 1, show the failure one. Now for the next rule, we need to reference what we did above, where we added a CSS class to template name and app ID for the checkmark. But what happens is once that CSS class is added, right, the display rule is met, the CSS class is added, it's going to keep that class until it is actually removed. And if you are refreshing the page, it will be removed, or we can actually manually remove it based on another condition. So what I wanted to do was make sure that the checkmark is really only ever shown when total items is higher than 0. So we've added it here, but that means we'll do the opposite on the failure. We'll remove the CSS class of checkmark from those same 2 fields when it's a failure. So this is likely not super necessary in this case because things are going to be hidden so well in the end result. But just to be sure, I'm removing them. So if an app is not found, that check mark has no chance of showing because that check mark is being removed. Okay, so we're just going to let's do these 3 display rules for now. I think that's actually all we need. Of course, we'll go test this now, and then we'll come back to kind of the last finishing touches. There's one more rule and then some extra CSS that we're going to utilize. Okay, so we're going to just test the success first. Okay, that shows these 2 things show with the check mark. Great. If I get a failure, Everything is still hidden that should be hidden, and this is shown. And if those two template name and app ID fields were being shown, then we would know that the check mark is also being removed as the custom CSS class. So these are our last remaining fields that we have to do something with. Now, with these particular fields, I actually don't want to see them ever. I want them to be hidden 100% of the time, whether an app is successfully found by name or not. I want them to be hidden all the time. So that means on page load, okay, here's how we're going to do this. On page load, total items is going to be blank, right? Because this pipe hasn't been run. It only runs when somebody types something in and searches for the particular app, and then total items gets a value. So again, on page load, total items is always going to be blank. So we're going to use that to hide it right away. And then we're going to keep it hidden. We are going to keep it hidden. So if total items is blank, we are going to hide total items, otherwise do nothing. So we're just going to hide it and just do nothing after that. So it doesn't matter what else happens. We're saying hide it and do nothing else. And we're also going to do the same thing with the pipe status field as well. Hide and do nothing. Okay, and here's what that looks like now. Everything's hidden. We have no result. We have one result. If I search again, right, everything's hidden again. Now, last but not least, I want to change how this particular search section looks. So I want the search button here, right next to or right to the right of the actual input. And to do that, we're actually not doing anything with the form itself. What we're doing is we're just customizing the form with some custom CSS. And of course, we're going to talk about each section, but it's only a few lines of CSS. So starting at line 11 down to line 25. What we've done, and I lied, we are doing one thing with the actual with the form. You can see here that I've put the search input, which I realize I haven't actually talked about yet. The search input is actually a field on the table. It's a record field. It's just a text field, and I called it search by app name, and I've hidden the title or removed the title, and I'm treating this as like a search input, but it's actually a real field. When I save this form, that value will be saved unless I use a record rule to update it back to blank. So it's not a big deal that it's being filled out. We're not going to use it ever again. It's a one-time use field, but that's how I did that. So it's not an actual like search box. It's just a text field disguised as a search box. Anyways, I put that text field and the trigger pipe button inside of its own row or column, and I've given the column a CSS class of app_search, because what I want to do is I want to take that whole column and I want to change how it displays its contents. And using my newfound favorite method of doing so, we're changing the display to flex. Okay, and this is going to help us super, super easy. Just take all of the contents and display them in a nice, beautiful, consistent, clean way. And to do that, all we have to do is 3 more lines, justify content, space between, align the items. So we're aligning the button. Justified contents will align across the x-axis in this case, and aligning items will align them again along the y-axis in this case. And then how are we going to handle wrapping? So when the screen gets smaller, do we want to wrap the items or not? And that's all we're doing. Now, the next 2 things are just defining the 2 different fields on that particular column, right? The text field and the the trigger pipe button. We're saying make the text field 75% wide, make the search button 20% wide. And then the button itself, to search, make that 100% wide. So what that looks like here is if I let me make sure I saved. Okay, now they're all on one line. This is going to be super responsive when the screen size changes. They are aligned vertically along the y-axis, and they're spaced out on the x-axis. This input is 75% width. Then this kind of other part of this column is 20% wide, and then the button takes up 100% of the 20% width. Okay, does that hopefully make some sense? I'm not an expert. I'm not qualified to explain CSS to you, but that's how it works, at least for my understanding. Okay, and that's it. So we're actually done now. There's nothing else to do. We've taken it from point A to point B. When I search for something and I get no answer, no response, again, this is searching. This is using a pipe right on the form to look up values and respond, or take those response values and put them into various form inputs. And then we're using the display rules based on that pipe response values, and then we're hiding, showing, adding CSS classes, removing CSS classes, showing CSS selectors, all sorts of kind of fancy stuff. But there's like, half a dozen or so features of Tadabase that we're using all together right now. And that's where the true power of Tadabase really shows, is when we have all of these features that don't seem like much just by themselves, but when you combine them with other Tadabase features, you just create this like massively awesome thing. So anyways, that's my supercharged form using CSS selectors, 25 lines of actual CSS code on the page, and display rules. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.